Just saying with regards to this bill, Labor remains opposed to the repeal of the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act under Part 4 of this bill, Mr Chair. And it's appropriate that I speak to this today because on Monday night we actually had a public meeting on housing, Mr Chair, in Waitakere, and it was a big coincidence given that it was Spotlight on housing in Waitakere this week. So, Mr Chair, what came up are things that are pertinent to this bill, things with respect to a crisis that is occurring with regards to housing, and the fact that not only do people not have access to appropriate social housing, but there's no access to affordable housing as well, Mr Chair. And both those things were the big themes of the public meeting that we heard from people on Monday night. Now, Mr Chair, it makes absolutely no sense, first and foremost, that this bill, or this part, that this housing, repealing of the affordable housing, be put in the infrastructure bill. And as my colleague said before, Mr Chair, it's almost like it was an attempt to hide it away so that no one would know what was going on. Now, most New Zealanders still agree that owning a house is a big part of being a Kiwi. Being able to raise your children in the same place, being able to raise your kids in a community where they access the same sports clubs, they go to the same schools, they grow up alongside the same children. And what we're seeing now, Mr Chair, because of a lack of affordable housing, is the fact that many of these children are in transient families and moving around from one suburb or one city or one town to another as their parents struggle to find not only employment but also adequate housing, affordable housing for their children. Now, it does make sense that local authorities play a part in providing affordable housing, play a part in the provision of social housing for their communities, because they are at the coalface with regards to the needs of their community and knowing what is required. And as a government, and as that government has said over and over again, they keep saying that it's not for the central government to dictate what happens nationally. But however, here they are, taking away the right for the local authorities to have a say with respect to social housing and affordable housing for their communities. It's a slight contradiction, we on this side think that's occurring at the moment with respect to this legislation, Mr Chair. Now, the problem is with repealing it is that side of the House has been trying to put out there and tell people that it was almost like it was something that was compulsory for the councils to do, but it was merely an option that was in place in the legislation, an option that those councils, those local authorities could take up if they saw the need for that to occur. Now, when we remove it, when we repeal that part of the legislation, what we're doing is we're taking away that option, and instead those developers will have every right in the world to develop property purely because of their bottom line, their profits, with no recognition of the social needs that may be required in the communities. And that's something that we on this side are incredibly concerned about. Now, there's a couple of things that came up that are pertinent to this bill on Monday night at that public meeting. One is the ageing population and how much trouble this country is going to be in if we have elderly people that don't own their own homes and we don't have social housing or affordable housing in place. Down the track, our younger generation are going to have to ensure that those people are adequately housed. Why wouldn't we do something now to ensure that we're putting the structures into place to make sure that we're looking after them in the long term? It makes sense, it's common sense, but unfortunately that side of the House doesn't seem to know what common sense is, Mr Chair. Now, Mr Chair, we are concerned, and there's a number of other things that I know my colleagues wish to discuss with regards to this bill, where we've got two SOPs up, which I want to thank our spokesperson on housing, Moana Maki, for. One is with regards to removing the proposed changes from the bill, so protects affordable housing by removing the proposed changes from the bill, and by doing that should be ensuring that our local authorities would still have a say in what goes on with regards to putting the necessary infrastructure in place with respect to affordable housing and social housing, Mr Chair. The other SOP that my colleague Moana Maki, our spokesperson for housing, has got up is Labor is disappointed the government has decided to remove the prohibition of restrictive covenants that aim to exclude affordable housing. Now, this is something else that needs to be discussed in detail, and it's about protection, Mr Chair. It's about ensuring that our councils have a say where our social housing goes.
Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I rise to speak to the infrastructure bill and part 4 in particular.